Welcome to this week's demo lab on crosstabs and chi-square. So you're going to want to download the document here and the syntax file. So besides the syntax file, we need the same GSS codebook and data set that we've been using for demo labs. Okay, so for crosstabs, we're using categorical variables, and it's going to be easier to make comparisons if we're using ones that don't have too many categories. And so we're going to use theism again, and we could use the full one here, but we're just going to use a collapsed version. And again, we wouldn't want to use any variable like this, something like age or hours worked or income that hasn't been collapsed into categories. So we're going to use one of these 3 category ones. And so this is the same variable as this one, it's just collapsed. I'm going to choose this one. So what this one does is it takes this one, and then if somebody answered they don't believe in God or that they aren't sure and don't believe they can find out, they're a 1 for atheist or agnostic. If they said a higher power but not a personal God or sometimes, that's a 2. And if they said yes without doubts or yes with doubts, that's a 3. So we have kind of these 3 different categories. So I'm going to use this variable for my dependent variable. Okay, so I'm just making a frequency table to see how do people fit into these 3 categories. So I have 2 ways to do that. I can first just want to make sure that my syntax will show up. I want to turn on weighting, and I know that my weight variable in this data set is called weight variable. And then I'm going to put in my variable here to this frequency table syntax. And there's my frequency table. Again, I could go analyze, descriptives, going back to the print back on, edit, options, viewer, making sure this is checked and clicking OK. Data, weight cases by, find my weight variable, put it into here and click OK. And then analyze descriptives, frequencies, make sure this is checked, display frequency tables, find that variable, the theism 3cat version 2, and click OK. Okay, so I'm going to put my syntax. In, and then I'm going to put my frequency table in. Okay, so we can see here that about 2/3 of respondents do believe in God with or without doubts. Just under a 1/5 believe in a higher power or sometimes believe in God. And then just over 14% are atheist or agnostic. Okay, let's go to part 1. Okay, so for part 1, we have to choose an independent variable to use for crosstab and chi-square. And so we already know again what our dependent variable is. And so let's look at our code book and see what we might choose from. So again, something like age wouldn't work, right? This is 18 to 89. Imagine how many columns you would have. So something like age 3cat would work, something like all energy would work, right? We don't want ones that are going to have something like income in thousands. It needs to be categorical with not too many categories. So let's see. Why don't we choose this one right below trust people. So we want to know if there's a relationship between how trusting people are of others and the extent to which they believe in God or not. So we're going to do trust people. And it says to run a frequency variable of this table. So same thing we did before with the frequency table. We just put in the name of the variable. Click play. Or again, you can go analyze descriptive frequencies. Make sure this is checked. put in the variable and click OK or enter. Okay. Let me put in my syntax. Grab my frequency table. And so you can see here that almost 2/3, over 3/5 of folks said you can't be too careful in dealing with people. Just under 10% said it depends, and just over a quarter said that you generally can trust people. Okay, so now we're going to create a crosstab and calculate the chi-square value, and we're going to share syntax and output. So our dependent variable, right, the outcome one was that theism 1, theism 3 cat v2, and our independent variable here is the trust people. So I can put that in and I can click play, and that would work. If I wanted to use drop-down menus, I could go, analyze, descriptives, crosstabs. Now, if I do this, though, it's a little more complicated because I need to remember to do two things. Let me get my variables in there first. So my independent variable is always going in the column, and my dependent variable is going in the row. It's important not to get them switched because we want the column percentages to match the order of the arrangement of these so that we can compare them correctly. Okay, so I need to go into the statistics window. So I need to click on statistics and tell it I want a chi-square value. And I need to go into cells and under percentages, click on column percentages. I don't want to click on all of these or I'll get way too much. I'm going to leave observed counts, but I want to add column percentages to it. So here is my crosstab. And here's my chi-square output. Okay. Given your crosstab and ignoring the chi-square output, tell the story of the table. Does there appear to be a relationship? And if so, what is it? What's its direction or relationship? How substantive is it? And justify with reference to the column percentages. So this is my crosstab. And again, when I'm looking at this, I'm going to look across. And I'm looking at these percentages. If you notice the totals here, right, there are 893 people who said can't be too careful. So even though it might look like more people said can't be too careful in this row than these others, right? That is true, that it was more people, but it's actually a smaller percentage out of this column, right? And so we want to make sure we're comparing the column percentages and not these counts. Okay, so let's look. Let's look at this first one. So this is the outcome being atheist or agnostic. So we can see just over 10% of people who said you can't be too careful dealing with people. So less trusting or atheist, smaller or agnostic, just under 10% said of people who said it depends in terms of trusting were atheist or agnostic, and then a little bit more over 10% of people who said can trust were atheist or agnostic. So these are all, let's see, these are about 5.2% apart. So people who are trusting were a little bit more likely to be atheist agnostic than people who depends, but these are about 3 apart. These are about 2.5. So the differences aren't too huge as we go across. There's not that much of a relationship here. Let's look at the next row. So here we can see that we're jumping up 10% and then we go back down 5. So people who are not as trusting of people are less likely, over 10% less likely than people who say it depends to believe in a higher power or sometimes believe in God. And also, if we compare these two, we can see that the people who are least trusting of people are over 6% less likely than the people who say you can trust to believe in a higher power sometimes. And then these are a little different, but less than 5% different with the people who are trusting a little bit less likely to believe in a higher power sometimes compared to depends. Let's go to the last row. Okay, so these are the outcome of believing in God with or without doubts. And so you can see here that people who are less trusting, over 70% believe in God. And then people who say it depends and people who say you can trust are pretty similar. They're about 0.8% apart. But both of these are like about 9 to 10%, or let's see, this would be like 8% different, maybe 8 to 9% different than this one. So what we're seeing is that, to put this kind of all together, people who are less trusted, so the respondents who are less trusting of other people are about 1/10 more, like 1 in 10 more of them are likely to believe in God. And as opposed to they're a little less likely, right, to then believe sometimes or just believe in a higher power. They're more likely to actually believe in a God, with or without doubts. And then we can see that the folks who are more trusting, or say it depends in terms of trusting, are a little bit less likely to believe in God with or without doubts, and are a little bit more likely to believe in a higher power sometimes. And then there might also be this difference here, right, where if we look at this, that the people who are trusting people, the respondents who are trusting people, are a little bit more likely to be atheist or agnostic, about 1 in 20 more likely compared to the other groups, whereas the people who say it depends are about 1 in 20 of them are more likely to believe in a higher power sometimes. So you see I'm comparing these as I go across. What I'm not doing is just saying, oh, you know what, a majority of them, no matter what, believe in God with or without doubts, right? That's true, but that's not what I'm interested in here. I'm interested in the variation between these and whether there's is variation and what that relationship is. Okay, so what will I put here? Let's see. There does appear to be a relationship. What is it? Respondents who are less trusting of people are more likely to believe in God, compared to respondents who say it depends, or that you generally can trust other people. And then that was the main finding. And then also, the respondents who trust other people were a bit more likely to be atheist or agnostic compared to respondents who said it depends, who were in turn a bit more likely to believe in a higher power, or sometimes believe in God. Okay, so those were kind of the direction and relationship, and then we want to talk about cross-step column percentages as well. So if we go back to here, respondents who are less trusting, right, that can't be too careful, 71.7% of it are more likely to believe in God. So we can say that was 70.1%, compared to respondents who say it depends, or that you generally can't trust other people. And so again, that's about, depending on which it was, because these two are pretty similar, I'm just going to kind of lump them in. So I'm going to say here about 8% more likely. So I'm just doing like 71.7 minus, so like 72 minus 63, it's like 9%, 72 2 minus 64 is like 8%. I'm just saying it's around 8%. And then for this last one, I was saying that that was about 5% different. So it was like the 8.3 to 13.5, and then the 28.1 to 23.7 is about 5%. Okay. Now the chi-square test. So the null hypothesis is always that there is no relationship, in this case, between how US adults would, how much they trust people, or say that they generally trust, generally speaking, can most people be trusted? So between trust in others and theistic beliefs. And then the alternative hypothesis is that there is a relationship. And again, mathematically, right, what we're looking at is, as you see in the chapter, right, that the null is basically saying that what we would expect to find if there was no relationship, the expected crosstab, right, like would be that this percentage would be in each of these, this percentage would be for each of these, this percentage would be for each of these, and so that would be the counts we get, versus what we actually got, right, that they're different enough that we are confident that there is a relationship or that they're the same, right? And so the null is that expected and that observed crosstabs are the same, and the alternative is that they're markedly different enough for us to be confident that there is a relationship and that they're not just different from chance. But this is what we're actually kind of evaluating in real life context. Okay, so now considering our chi-square output. So what is our p-value? We're going to look at the Pearson chi-square row. We're going to look at this asymptotic significance two-sided. So this is our p-value right here. So p is 0.004. And what does that mean in regards to our null hypothesis? So because p is less than 0.05, we can reject our null. Right, and so we're accepting our alternative. We're rejecting that there's no relationship. We're confident there is one. If p was not less than 0.05, it would mean we can't reject our null hypothesis. So is there a statistically significant relationship? Yes. Because p is less than 0.05, there is a significant relationship. And again, what does significance actually means? That's what we're answering here. So what I'm going to do is find the percent that I have of confidence, right? So significance means I'm over 95% confidence in general, but I'm going to give a more specific answer. So if my p-value was 0.004, I'm going to do 1 minus 0.004, and that's going to give me 0.996. And so I am 99.6% confident that, and then basically my alternative hypothesis, right, that there is a relationship between trust in others and theism among US adults in 2022. Okay. Okay, next we want to see if it's substantive or not. So the first thing for it to be substantive is it has to be significant, because if we're not confident that the relationship even exists, we're not going to claim that it's a sizable one. So if we look at number 6, we can see that we said it is significant. So the relationship is significant. So it could be substantive. And then let's look at how different the crosstab column percentages were. And so if I go back to number 4, I can see that in this case, there was about an 8% difference. And again, it doesn't need to be that every category is a certain percentage different than every other category, right? It might be like if we're looking at just this one, these two are not substantively different, but these are substantively different than this. And so I'm going to say yes, right? So the relationship is significant. See number 6. And um, there was about an 8% difference between those who did not trust others generally and the rest of respondents in terms of believing in God. So, in general, we'd often say that, if there's at least like a 5% difference, then it's substantive. There's not a hard and fast rule, though. You have to evaluate this, right? So maybe there's a 3% difference, but one of them was at 0.2% and the other was at 3.2%. And so, that 3.2% is much more likely. Like, how many times more likely is that than the other group? And so you just have to evaluate in context of whether, again, you think it's a sizable difference or not. And so, but there's a lot of things that go into outcomes. And so if something is causing over 1 in 20 people in one category, right? In this case, those who don't trust others to believe in God compared to the others, right? That 1 in 20 person difference, we're going to say, is probably substantive. And so in this case, it was about 2 out of 20 here. Then even this difference here was about 1 out of 20. Okay, finally, do I think it is a causal relationship? So it was significant. It was substantive. Let's think about the rest of this. So causal order. Do I think that not trusting other people would impact your beliefs in God and cause you to be less likely to so if you don't trust others, you're more likely to believe in God. Or if you do trust others, it causes you to be less likely. Initially, I thought maybe it would be the opposite, that people who believed in God would be more trustworthy, and the causal order might be even backwards in that, right? But maybe if we think about this from a theoretical sense perspective, so what might be going on here? It might be that people who are trusting other people don't feel a need to turn to God, and people who are not as trusting feel like they need something else to trust. So that could be the theoretical order. And that would make the causal order correct as well. So the causal order is asking, is it that belief in God is influencing whether you trust other people, or is it that trusting other people influences your belief in God? And let's see. How about this other difference here? Is there a reason that people who are more trusting would be like that 1 out of 20 of them would be more likely to be atheist or agnostic? I guess it's the same thing, right? So we're saying that the more for all of this, right, the more that you are trustworthy, we can see right here, this is more than that, this is more than that, and then this is more than that. So we're saying as you get more trusting of people, you are less likely to believe in God. So I guess we could argue that. Is there something else that might be preceding these that would explain this relationship away? So it could be maybe like, I don't know if there's a relationship between kind of like authoritarianism and belief in God versus, which I'm guessing like maybe folks would be less trusting who are more authoritarian. Um, I'm not sure. I can't really think of anything off the top of my head that would explain it away. So I guess I'll argue that it is causal. So I'm going to say yes, the relationship is significant. The number 6 and substantive. Number 4. No, number 4. Oh, actually, sorry. Substantive was number 7. Okay. Um, As people are more likely to trust others, they may find less of a need to turn to a belief in God. Those who are less trusting may find more of a need to believe in God. So again, I'm not doing research on this. This could be completely wrong, but this is one way to have a theoretical connection between them that I could think of. And I'm saying that based on that theoretical one, right, that the causal order is correct. This explanation matches the causal order. Belief in God, or I guess levels of theism, right, the extent to which you believe in God, are not influencing whether or not you trust other people. Again, I might have argued that it was the wrong causal order if the results came out differently, right? That maybe people who are very believing in God are more likely to trust others, but that's not what we found. And non-spurious, I cannot think of any preceding variables that would explain away the relationship. So obviously with the level of difference we saw, I'm not saying that whether or not you trust other people has this direct cause where it determines whether you believe in God or not. We can see, in fact, that across these groups, there's a lot of similarity. However, what I'm saying is that it's one thing that impacts this variation, right? It's one factor that's having an impact on people's theism. Okay, let's look at part two. So for this one, it's the exact same as part one, except that it has to be a causal relationship. So if I were to do one and it turns out not to be causal, I can't use it for part two. So I have to run some different crosstabs and chi-squares and look at them until I find one that I think is causal. Now, we already found one that I'm arguing that's causal in part one. So if I wanted to, I could take all of my answers here and paste them into part two instead and redo part one. And then part one, it wouldn't matter again. For part one, you could have one that is causal, that isn't causal, it doesn't matter. For part two, you have to have one that is causal. So let's look at some options here. So here's my code book. So again, I can't use a variable like phys health that's 0 through 30. That's way too many different. It's not a small categorical variable. That would be way too many columns. But I could use something like phys health indicator. So if I were to run that, you'll see in the syntax, right, this is going to be problems 9 and 10, but I have this extra, so just extra ones to run. You can also always just change the names in the ones, but this is helpful for me to remember where my dependent variable goes versus my independent variable. So let's try phys health indicator. So I'm asking, does having or not having days of poor physical health influence people's beliefs in God? So this is just going to test for, is there a relationship? But to argue it's causal, I'm going to say that, right, this is having an impact on variation in this. And again, I could also go analyze descriptives, crosstabs. I already have my settings set up. I haven't closed out of SPSS. It's still there, so I don't need to go into these again. I just need to change this to the variable that I want to use. Okay, so what do we see here? We see that these are about the same, right? These, as we go across, these crosstab column percentages are not very different. And indeed, our p-value is more than 0.05. So we're not confident that there is a relationship. So if we're not even confident that there is a relationship, we're not going to argue that it's causal. Okay, let's try a different one. So maybe political views would be something. Why don't we try party ID? And so again, this is 8 categories. That's a lot to look at. I could do it, but I'd rather do one with fewer. Why don't we do this 3 category one? So Democrat, Independent, Other, Republican. Okay, so I'm going to do party 3 cat. So let's go back to my syntax and put that in. Again, I could rewrite them here. I'm just going to use this because less to rewrite. Okay. So here we can see that, yes, we're over 99.9% confident that there is a relationship. So it is significant. Is it substantive and what is it? So if we look at just people who definitely believe or believe with doubts, we can see going from Democrat to independent increases by, I don't know, like 8%. And then from independent to Republican goes up almost another 20, or from here to here is, not quite 30. And similarly, we can see these are going down. And these two are pretty similar, but then it drops. So we're seeing that Republicans are more likely to have higher theistic beliefs, right? Versus Democrats and independents are kind of in the middle of that, or here a little bit more similar to the Democrats. But we can see that there is this relationship here. So if I'm asking myself, is it causal? We said it's significant and substantive. Causal order. So would it be that your theism changes your party or your party belief changes your theism? So I would say that it could be multi-directional, but in general, I would say that probably people have their beliefs around God first, and then that impacts their political party beliefs. Although you can have, I mean, if you are, a Reform Jew, or you're a Unitarian Universalist, right, you're going to be a lot more likely to be a Democrat versus like if you're evangelical, you might be more likely to be Republican. And so these are kind of these categories encompass more differences, and it might be more about kind of what type of religious belief you have. And because if thinking about what is the explanation, right, it would be that the more kind of liberal you are, maybe you're being socialized to, you're living in a culture where there's more folks that have similar beliefs in these. And so in that case, I guess I wouldn't probably argue that this is causal. So even though it's significant and substantive, maybe there's something else preceding political party and preceding level of theism that would explain away this relationship. So maybe, for example, it's like region. So maybe if you live in a region that is more Republican and has more folks who have high theistic beliefs, right? And other people live in regions that are more democratic and have more kind of like atheist or agnostic beliefs. And so it's actually a region that's impacting that socialization of both rather than it being one of these. So if that's the case, I can't use this for part 2, but why don't we look at region and see if that one would work? So region, if I go back to my code book, I have this region 16. So this is more categories I might want to do. Let's see. Region of residence at age 16 versus region of interview, like where they live now. So I could use kind of where they were growing up or where they are right now. Let's just use where they are now. Okay, so I'm going to change this to region. We could look at both actually, and 16. And they're both significant. Here we can see that, so this is the just regular region, New England. So we can see about 55%. This is the people who believe in God with or without doubts. This is in the 60s, 70s, 80, around 80, back to around 50s. So we can see there's a lot of variation by region. And if we look here, these are under 10%, etc. What about this one? This one includes also not living here. But these are all kind of 60s. This goes up to 80s, 70s. These are still pretty similar. But I'm seeing more difference here in terms of New England, I believe. So let's use this region one. Okay. So I'm going to use this one, and I think it's causal. So I'm not going to even do that yet. So what I'm going to do here is it wants me to do a frequency table of region. So that is right here for problem 9. And then just seeing kind of where folks live on the distribution of my respondents. So if I'm looking at this valid percent column, right, we have about 5% living in New England, a little more than that in West North Central, about that in East North Central, a little more than that in Mountain Region. Then we have over 10% in Mid-Atlantic, East North Central, and West South Central, a little more than that in Pacific, and then we have about a fifth in South Atlantic. Okay. So now the crosstab and chi-square value, I already did those. Let's see. They were right here. Okay. Actually, so let's okay. Now I can see it. So it was where's it? Right here. Okay. So what's the story of the table? So let's see. So who's kind of the most theistic? We would see that there's these groups that are around 80. So East, South Atlantic, and West South Central. And they're also the least likely to be atheist or agnostic as I look across, right? So these are the only two that are under 10% in this row. These two are the only two that are around 80% or higher in this row. So East South Atlantic and what's the other? West South Central respondents. So that's those from Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Texas. Were most likely to be theistic. And we can see the opposite, right? So here's 55, 63, 55, 55. Let's look at the ones that are under 55. Are they also the most likely to be atheists? Let's see, or agnostic. 20% is the highest. We have some here, 18% next, 16, and then we have a couple others here actually that are like 16.0. Yeah, so let's see, 20, 18, 16, 15, 15, 12, 14, 12. So those are all kind of similar. So let's look at let's say 20%. Let's start by saying these three are the least likely to have high theism. So it'd be New England, Mountain, Pacific region respondents were the least likely to be theistic, right? To believe in God. with or without doubts. And we can see that's folks that are in Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. In Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico, and in Washington, Oregon, California, Alaska, and Hawaii. Okay. So then if we look at these other rows, so going back to this one, we can see that right, those two are definitely also the least likely to be agnostic or atheist. Those two that we said are the most likely to be theistic. Um, and these ones were most likely, but also I would say these ones are pretty close. So they're not hugely different. I might just leave that one alone for now, because then let's see, look at this. 25 under 2020. This one's lower. You can see this little bit of a drop. And these are a little higher along with this. So Mountain Pacific and New England seem also to be higher, right? They're the only ones. This one's around 20. Yeah, so this is like the next closest, East North Central, which is Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and Ohio. But it looks like those three are the highest both for atheist, agnostic, and higher power, or sometimes. Um, yeah, so I could say that New England, Mountain, and Pacific regions were the least likely to be this theistic, and the most likely to be right atheist, agnostic, or um, believe in a higher power rather than a personal God, or sometimes believe in God. Okay, so I need to also express how different this is by referring to this. I told kind of the direction. So we can talk about direction, like if you had one that was more like the education one, you might use direction as in like the more like the higher degree status, like degree that you have, the more or less likely you are to believe in God, right? For this, we don't quite have direction because we have a nominal level independent variable, not an ordinal one. It's not ordered. Um, and so what we just see is that, right, different regions have higher levels of theism, right? And so um, this explains kind of that relationship or direction, but we need to talk about whether it's substantive and refer to some of these column percentages. So for these, we're saying the most likely to be theistic, they are around or over 80%. So about 4 out of 5 plus respondents there were there, and least likely to be atheist agnostic. So that was under 10%. And we can see compared to overall, right, that this was about 2/3, right? And this is about 14.3% for that's all response, including the ones from this column. So we can see how different those are. Um, New England Mountain Pacific region response were the least likely to be theistic. So that was 55, all under 60%. So that's less than 3 out of 5. And the most likely to be one of these other categories. So here would be, this was 27, so this is over 16%. And this one was 24 point, so about 25+%. Okay. Maybe I'll just also add as I'm comparing so that, so like over 10% higher than the overall total. And this less than 10% is least likely to be atheist agnostic. That's not that different than them, but it's pretty different than right like this group. Um, we can see this right here's where you might say that like, okay, is 5.4% to 10.8% would be which we don't have one exactly at that, but like it's not that huge of a percent difference. But it would actually mean that the other group is double as likely than this group to be atheist or agnostic. Um, and this one is, so these are smaller. This is about like a, again, I'm less going to compare the total. The total, when I'm comparing to the total, it's kind of shrinking the differences a little bit more because the groups I'm looking at are part of this total. But um, just kind of a quick hand way for me to do this now since there's so many groups to make comparisons between. Right? If it was just like a few groups, I'd probably just compare them directly. But and honestly, actually, when I did something like this for a journal article, what I would do is I'd actually use Excel and I'd figure out, okay, here's the percentage for these groups versus here's the percentage for all the other groups. And I'd show that actual comparison rather than the total. But I'm not doing anything serious enough here for that. So this is about like at least a 4% plus difference. The least likely to be theistic. We said less than 60. And so that's at least a 6% plus difference. Agnostic, that's going to be at least a 2% plus difference. Okay. So I'm just sharing kind of, I'll say from the total. But again, if I was using one like this, right, I would say, oh, there's a 2% difference. I wouldn't compare them to this one because this includes both. I want to compare these. Again, I just decided to do it to that because there are so many regions there. Okay. My null hypothesis is that, oops. Okay, so my null hypothesis is that there is no relationship between region and theism among great US adults, and my alternative is there is. Okay, so what is my p-value, and what does that mean in terms of my null hypothesis? So you can see my p-value is, right, here's chi-square, here's p, less than 0.001. So that means I'm going to reject my null hypothesis, right, that there's no relationship because that's less than 0.05. So that means that there is a significant relationship. There is a significant relationship. P is less than 0.001, which is less than 0.05. What does that mean? Well, if P is less than 0.001, right, then I am over 99.9% confident that there is a relationship between region and theism among US adults in 2022. Justify that's substantive. Okay, so first, is significant. So we know the relationship, we're confident the relationship exists. Um, And then is it sizable? So we're going back to these crosstab column percentages. And we can see that as an example, well, just over half of New England respondents are theistic, meaning, let's say for this case, like that they believe in God with or without doubts. Over 80%, so over 4/5 of respondents from the East-South Atlantic region do, which is from 55 to 84-ish, not quite 30, but let's say an over 25% difference. So over 1 in 4 more people in the East-South Atlantic region among respondents are doing so compared to in the New England region. That is substantive, for example. Okay, so that's one. So we could look at some others as well, but that's showing us that, right, there's meaningful, sizable differences between the regions. Again, not all regions, right? Some regions are similar to each other, but there are regions that are different, which is enough for this. So it is significant and substantive, right? See number 14. And let's look at these others. So would it make sense for region to influence belief in God or belief in God to influence region? So there could be some people who, like, based on their belief in God, travel to a different region to kind of seek that out. But I don't think that's a huge driver of movement. I think a lot of people are living where they grew up or where they have job opportunities or other things. I'd say the bigger one would be that where you're living is having this cultural impact on you, right? And so let's start with a theoretical sense, actually. People who live in particular regions could be influenced by the culture of that region and socialized into particular levels of theism. So if everyone around them believes in God and that's kind of how they grew up and what they're used to and how people talk, right, they might do that. And if people are generally skeptical of God, that may be what they're used to, right? And so that's kind of influences their beliefs. On the other hand, most people are not leaving to move to a different state based upon having different theistic beliefs. So I'm saying it's not that your theism is going to change your region, but your region might have an impact on your theism. And here I can't think of, so I'm saying it's not spurious. I cannot think of a preceding variable that would explain away the relationship. So not much is coming before the region you live in. Again, this was kind of where I got caught up on political beliefs. I was saying maybe region would influence the whole thing, and region comes before political beliefs, but I can't think of much that would come before this. So I'd have to think of one that comes before it time-wise, and then also that would explain why I'm finding, these certain regions I mentioned having higher levels of theism and certain other regions having lower levels. All right.